Welcome to the Deep Light podcast from Park City's Presbyterian Church. This is a space for community, healing, hope, and education around topics of rescue and growth. Our prayer for this series is that it illuminates a deeper understanding of struggles within and around us, as well as God's profound love and redemptive light in Jesus Christ.
Well, hi everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Deep Light. My name is Mark Davis. I serve as one of the pastors of Park City's Presbyterian Church, and we're always glad that you come along for the conversation that we are going to have today. Today I'm honored to have Ryan Rodriguez, who is a member of our church, who also serves as a licensed counselor here in Dallas in private practice. And today we're going to talk about redemption. We're going to talk about it from a personal standpoint, about our own stories of rescue, but also particularly in the area of addiction. How can we really help people? We're in a series in the fall of 2022 where we're talking about this on Deep Light in our church. And there's going to be a number of guests that we have, again, talking about their own experiences and the need for redemption. And what we mean by that is just God's powerful rescue in our life, which we all desperately need. So as always, we want you to know if you need help with anything, please reach out to us. You can do so at deeplight@pcpc.org, and we would be delighted to walk alongside you and encourage you any way we can. Hi.
Hello.
I'm so glad you're here.
Me too.
And that you're so willing to take time to tell a little bit of your story, but then also a bit of your practice and how you have been used by God to help others come along. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about your journey to faith. Let's start there. Just what was it like for you? How did God do this redeeming work in your life? Where were you at? What took place? How did he open your heart and mind? All those things.
Okay. So I grew up in a Christian home, went to church every Sunday, went to Pine Cove every summer, did VBS.
All of it.
All of that stuff.
Yeah.
And, even in college did some of that, but I was not, looking back, I was not connecting the Sundays. I wasn't connecting the summers, and it wasn't until I was about 27 that I started to struggle with alcoholism, and I was given the gift of desperation. And I had heard it called a gift before, and I was like, what? I mean, that's not a gift. That's awful,
Yeah.
But truly, the gift of desperation, because it wasn't until I was so desperate in my alcoholism that I actually just turned everything over to God.
So when was the first time you heard the phrase gift of desperation?
Probably I was about 28, and my husband dragged me into an AA meeting, and I made him go with me. He was like, you need to go to AA. I was like, I'm not going by myself. So you can go with me or nobody's going.
Yeah.
And so he joined me. He does not have any alcohol problem whatsoever. And I kept hearing, I'm a grateful alcoholic and the gift of desperation.
And just in the time together in AA, you heard that language?
Just in the meeting.
Yeah.
And I was like, see, these people are crazy, and I was not bought in at all. But as my disease progressed, I became desperate and eventually ran out of my own ideas of how to fix the problem. And so I remember being in Bible study here, a Mother's Heart, and telling my Bible study leaders, I feel like God has hit me on the back of the knees with a baseball bat. And one of them said, yes, so now you can turn your head up to God.
Wow.
And I was like, right.
So when you have a lot that you already said that I want to chase down. So you go to AA, you go with your husband, he's kind enough to go with you. And at that point, did you think you had a problem with alcohol, or was it him telling you have a problem, or other people? Where were you at in that process?
I had an inkling that there was an issue. But like a lot of us, I ended up, and us alcoholics, I ended up rationalizing a lot. Well, I'm drinking so much because I hate my job, or I'm drinking so much because whatever.
Right.
But I could quit if I wanted to, I could quit if I tried, and of course, almost every alcoholic has to prove I can have just one, and so you have that one and you're like, see, I'm not an alcoholic.
Right.
And then the next day, just a bender.
So how long so your first time to AA till you kind of came to a place of, or even did you go back like right away, or did it take some time for you to go back even?
I kept going at kind of my husband's mandate. Kept going. I I would leave early to go to the CVS and get wine,
Yeah.
I just didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be like these people.
Yeah.
Although they were extremely nice, extremely friendly, had their lives together.
You just didn't see yourself as being one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not one of you.
Yeah.
And we went through various things, so he had tried to control some of it, and then he was like, I'm not going to control you. I was like, cool, caused some more destruction. And then finally, it wasn't until we divorced and I had quit, I was told I would not see my daughter for a year, that I had just kind of come to, and it hit me, and I was like, this is it.
Yeah.
I'm done. It was grueling and horrible, extremely painful, especially to feel all those feelings.
Sure.
So the general presumption is people use or drink, whatever, to change the way they feel. We don't like uncomfortable feelings, so we try to change them.
Right.
Whereas normies, as we call them, people who don't drink or don't have a drinking problem, they can sit with uncomfortable emotions, like, big people. And so I had to sit with those emotions, and it was awful. And a few weeks later, I had gotten an email from my husband telling me everything I needed to do in order, or ex-husband at that point, everything I needed to do in order to see my daughter in 6 months instead of a year. And that was when it was like, okay, this is on. I've got my marching orders, and I can do this. I don't know how, but let's do it.
So how old was your daughter at that time?
She was 18 months.
Okay, so
Yeah.
just really a baby. Yeah, not even a toddler yet, and you're facing what you couldn't have imagined. I mean, you think about growing up, you're in the church, going to Pine Cove, all these things, and suddenly at post-college, now you're in a place of real despair. We talk about, you use that language, the gift of despair, but you couldn't have imagined your life having that kind of despair. True?
No, completely true. It was, there were so many, how did I get here moments. This is not how I saw my life going. And I know the whole thing, like, if you want to make God laugh, make a plan, but it was like, but this is really not where I saw my life going. But so much of the addiction, there's this magnetism to it. And how I often describe it to people is, I think we've all seen at some point a really bad horror movie where there's demon possession. And it's like, okay, you look like Ryan, you sound like Ryan, but you're doing and saying things that are not congruent with Ryan's character. So you're just kind of under this spell. And I remember bawling, crying, praying on my knees one time, like, please, like, just let me not drink, as I was drinking. So there's that obsession and compulsion, and it's something you can't will away or will yourself out of. Yeah.
I really love the way you're being so vulnerable and very quick into the interview too. Just saying, this is kind of where I was. Obviously God's used you and is using you in a lot of people's lives who struggle with very similar things, which we'll get to in a minute. But this interview is beautiful because it's going to weave your story, but also answers of hope and how God did that. You talked about, again, the phrase, the gift of despair, the gift of desperation. You mentioned how there are moments like, how did I get here? So when you had those questions, what did you do with those questions? Where did you go? Who did you talk to? Did you just, between you and God, did other people help you kind of identify the path that took you down this really dark way, or what happened there?
So I always kind of joke, I had a team, a team of people. If it takes a village, I did. If it takes a village to raise a kid, it takes a village to get somebody sober, you know. And so I had my 2 Bible study leaders who I consulted with. I had a therapist, I had a psychiatrist, my mom, my best friend, and my sponsor, and AA people, and I'm still probably missing somebody. And because so much of it, I'm strong-willed. I like my will and my ideas, and and I'd been using them for, at that point, 32 years, and a lot of times there was success with my ideas, it wasn't until the very end where they just really went sour. And so I needed all of those people, because it was like, okay, my ideas are no good, my ideas make me do really awful things. And so I need your ideas, and I trust y'all, and these were all Christians. These were all like practicing Christians. I'll say that.
Not just a cultural identity, but really strong faith.
Yes, and so, and so much of, I was talking to my husband about this the other day, so much of walking into the rooms of AA, or often people are very judgmental, right? Like, well, I'm not like that bad, or this or whatever. And it's that judgment that keeps us out of the rooms, but when I was able to recognize, okay, I might have this or this education or whatever, but you still have what I want, then I was able to listen, And so with all of these people who had peace or sobriety or sanity, dignity, integrity, those things, I was like, okay, I'm going to not listen to myself, and I'm going to listen to all y'all and talk to God a lot. And I talked to God a lot. We're recording this in the summer of 2022, knowing it's going to air in the fall. And this coming Sunday, I'm going to preach a sermon about Jesus' words, "You are the light of the world." He talks about being the salt of the earth, light of the world, which means Christ in us. And it's really interesting, because when you said what you saw in those people, that really was the light of Christ. I was about to ask you what made you, because you said I trusted them. So, and I still want to ask this question, what made you trust them? But before I could ask that, you talked about what you saw in them. And that really is a powerful picture of the radiance of Christ coming out of his children, where people are drawn to something. They might not even know what it is. Now, looking back, you were able to say they had dignity, they had peace, they had beauty. What did make you trust them, though? Because I know a lot of times I've been in situations where you can tell an individual that he's maybe not at the end of themselves yet, but they're beginning to be aware of a struggle. There's a reluctance to trust, a huge reluctance to trust, even people who they're married to, or pastors or friends, but there's a deep reluctance to trust. So what is it that caused you to trust them? I think, so at that period of my life, there had been many vocalized observations of my struggles. Some people make those observations in judgment or in gossip, or anything like that, right? Sure. There are others who make those judgments out of care and concern. And so it was those people I trusted. Like they were telling me those things not to be hurtful or not to put themselves above me, but as a genuine like truth is insight we don't see. Ryan, here is something you don't see, and help me help you, or how can I, what can I do, So and how I was able to discern the, ill intent from the good intent, I don't really know. It's probably just that light, you know.
But you could see it.
Yeah, that I could see. These people weren't saying these things to be hurtful. They were saying them out of genuine concern and wanting to help.
So I think you use the phrase, truth is in sight you can't see. Is that what you just said? And they go, okay, I love that. Let's chase that for a minute. We do what makes sense to us. So when you're living in addiction, whatever it could be, and there's addictions well beyond alcohol and other drugs, we know that. That phrase is really compelling. Truth is insight we can't see. But does the person that's in their addiction think they see truth? In other words, it's not real truth, but maybe it is to them. Does that make sense? So talk about that for a minute.
I'll talk about the disease in a spiritual sense. The disease lies to us. It says, "Oh, I'm having so much fun," when really I'm making a fool of myself. It tells me that I'm popular when people are making fun of me. And so the disease lies to us, and makes us feel these things that aren't real, but they really feel real.
So they feel like truth.
They
I
do.
really am happy. I really am liked. I really am. Whatever.
It feels very real. But I mean, you can ask 100% of people around, and it's like, no. Like, that's not good. And so, when I say like truth can be insight you don't see, it's kind of like, this is something you don't see. I don't walk on the street and see myself walk on the street. Somebody else can see me walk on the street. So I don't have this view of what I look like and what my behavior looks like at all times. Those around me, do. And so if it is evident to me they have my best interest, then I should trust this insight they're giving me. Hey, you have a problem, but it's hard to believe. And I was talking to somebody today. It's funny because any other disease that I can think of, if I said, Mark, you have cancer, you wouldn't be like, no, I don't,
Right.
Whereas with alcoholism or addiction, I can say, you're an alcoholic, and people all over say, nah. And so there's some element of subjectivity, and that's where it becomes so gray, because it's only true if I think it's true. All these people can say it, but until I believe it, it's not true.
Which means that the layers of lies and deception just continue to build on one another to the point where the person in that doesn't even know really what is true anymore.
Right. Yes. And a lot of times it's not until trusted others are able to be like, no, really, look at this, or, at the time it was so infuriating, but my husband had taken a couple of pictures of me at my very worst. Just indescribable. And I was so mad after that he had taken them. But really, it was great for me to see, like, well, that's not Photoshopped. That was me. That was real, because it didn't feel real when I was passed out that way. I don't remember it. So to have that and to know the genuine concern, not like, look what I have, I'm going to post it on Facebook, but to have that genuine concern was, it was very telling.
So when you saw that picture, and you can deny that it's real, but you knew it wasn't fake, this is a real picture, how often does the person's anger, like that you took a picture of me, become a distraction from the fact that that's me and I really need help? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In other words, it seems like a lot of times I've witnessed where people will just shift the attention off of the issue onto how you've treated me poorly, or you don't know the whole story. Talk about that for a minute. What's that look like? What did that look like in your life, and how do you see that in your own practice?
Yeah, I was angry and I was embarrassed, and I was like, please don't post that anywhere, you know. And I mean, with anything, you know, people want to share this insight, you know, and it is very angering, and it doesn't make sense, you know, if we think about it, you know, and it's so much more for an addict or an alcoholic, but if we were to break things down very simply, like golf is hitting a ball with a stick, okay, you know, addiction, like when you're a practicing alcoholic, you have alcohol, nothing else. When you take alcohol away, you get everything else, you know, and it's like, which one do you want, you know?
That's really well said. I mean, that's simple, but really well said.
Yeah, and it's, you know, but it's funny, people want to hold on to it, you know, and so it's that, how dare you take a picture of me? How dare you say that? You know, how dare you, you know, and all of that anger, which is deflecting,
right?
You know, trying to change the subject and make it about how you treat me poorly and not, you know, my egregious behavior, you know, and so it is important to, you know, bring it back, you know, and okay, let's talk about the issue.
Yeah,
like the real issue.
And that's probably why, in your story, but also in so many others, there has to be a team. I mean, it could be a sponsor, it could be a spouse, it could be a parent, et cetera. But that picture of, I can hold on to the alcohol, if it goes away, everything else comes in. That has to be terrifying for the person who's trying to just hold on to the alcohol so the other stuff won't come in, right? And that also probably is really confusing for people who don't have that struggle.
Yes.
So talk about that for a minute, both in your own experience, but also as, you know, a counselor. How do you help people who don't have that particular struggle, who see it as insanity, and sometimes just don't do it?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
How do you help people understand this is a very serious battle? It is a disease. It is really a wicked grip that is on people's lives.
Yes. So that's where the neuroscience comes in. And, you know, it can be, well, not can be, it is very complex and everything. But a lot of times, whether it's loved ones of an addict or alcoholic or the alcoholic or addict themselves, they like tangible or, you know, visible proof. You know, it's not just your word against mine. You think I'm an alcoholic, I think I'm just having fun, you know? So what happens there is when people drink or use, the prefrontal cortex, which is in the front, becomes impaired, and that affects, or that part of our brain is in charge of judgment, decision making, things like that.
Right.
So when that is impaired, the amygdala in the back of our brain, which is in charge of like survival and emotions, that takes over. And it irrationally believes that without that drug, I will die.
Yeah.
And so it becomes, it feels like it becomes very life or death. And that is what it feels like, you know? And so that's where you see this behavior that looks insane. Like you are losing your kids so you can drink.
Right.
You were losing your job, your car, your home, all this stuff so you can drink, you know? And so it looks like absolute insanity, you know, but to the person in the center of the storm, you know, just gripping the bottle, it's like, this is what I have to do.
Yeah.
You know, they're unable to zoom out and logically, rationally look at the picture because that prefrontal cortex is impaired.
So you said when you were in the midst of it, you ran out, your ideas weren't good. You ran out of ideas. What were some of the ideas that you were telling yourself, which I'm sure are very similar to what other addicts would tell themselves?
Great question. Other ideas, I will not drink during the week. I'll only drink on the weekend. And I'll only, this one's great, I'll only have 2 drinks. That sounds awful to any alcoholic. Like, why would you just have 2?
Right.
You know? Or, you know, I won't drink, I didn't drink liquor. Well, it wasn't my preference, but I'll hear a lot of men say, like, well, I won't drink scotch, I'll just drink beer. You know, when alcohol is alcohol, you know, it's just some types of it, like beer, you have to drink more
Yeah, it's diluted
to get the same, you know? Yeah, but alcohol is alcohol. And so there's that bargaining process, which really, you know, is one of the stages of grief.
Yeah.
And something we do in our, in intensive outpatient. A lot of times we will do grief over the disease, like grief over the addiction, because it becomes so much of your identity, how you have fun. If you're really progressing in the disease, it's how you spend all your time and all your money.
It could become your primary identity, right? You're seeing everything through the lens of, I've got to have this.
Totally. And so, and so in grief of this disease, there's that bargaining, like, well, if only I do this, then I can still do it, or if I only da-da-da, you know, a lot of that bargaining happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, because people, they just want to hold on to it, you know.
So in your experience, then, once people are beginning to become aware, I've got a problem, this is not controlling me. I'm sure it comes in stages. Some people, maybe it doesn't. It's just like all of a sudden they really hit the wall. But in my experience, it seems like it's in stages over a period of time where the layers begin to be exposed, and the surrender happens, you know, gradually, sometimes faster than others. I have a sibling who has had a horrific journey with addiction to cocaine. And so I walked closely with her, and I remember at one point saying to her, let me control your life. Let me just make every decision for you, which was so stupid. But I really believed if you'll just let me make every decision for you, you're going to be okay. Go here, go here, go here. And, you know, until she lost her 6-figure job working at a bank in California, lost her son, went to jail, not once, but twice. That's when all of a sudden, you know, she began to hit bottom. But, you know, you realize, I don't know where the bottom is, you know, and that's a very scary place to be for somebody who loves somebody who's in addiction. So when a person's coming to that place of, okay, I know I've got a problem, what sorts of things should those who love them be looking for, watching out for? Because I know a lot of times we can be codependent, we can actually be enabling the behavior, not even know we're enabling it. What sorts of things should we, who have a loved one trapped in this, what should we be looking for?
If they are on their way to, or, you know, realize they have the problem, and are wanting to do stuff about it, I always kind of think, like, the best thing, if you think of a bowling alley with bumper pads, you know, that kind of gentle guide, like, you know, little check-ins are fine, all that's fine.
The rails that you could go off on are protected for a season of time so that you don't fall back into it.
I mean, I wouldn't even say that, because sometimes what people need is to fall further.
So that could actually enable it.
Right.
Yeah, interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and so, but those check-ins, you know, that is all I would do as a parent, as a loved one. How's this going? You know, how are the holidays? Not how are the holidays, did you drink too much? You know, but just how are the holidays? You know, stuff like that, because we are like wild animals and we're easily scared off. If people, you know, get in our business and all of that. And at the end of the day, like, trying to rescue somebody all the time prevents them from hitting the bottom that maybe they need to hit in order to bounce. You don't bounce until you hit bottom. And so I mean, there will be people for decades, you know, whose parents have rescued or they pay for this or pay for that, when really, I mean, kind of the best thing is just
Cutting off.
Yeah. You know.
And it's understandable why
Absolutely.
parents don't, you know, because to think about what rock bottom could be is terrifying. Because you think it could be death, you know, or it could be prison, or it could be, you know, whatever. And our natural instinct is to try to protect someone from the horrific reality. But if we're not doing this right, we could actually be prolonging and maybe even promoting something that's going to actually create our worst nightmare just further down the road.
Yes, for sure. A lot of times, I mean, really enabling, it looks like love. You know, it looks like love. That's why people can sometimes find it hard to see that it's unhealthy and unhelpful.
Yeah.
You know.
So how important would it be for somebody that is got a loved one that's, you know, struggling with some form of addiction that's controlling their life, and, you know, they don't know what to do. In a community like ours, you know, where we live, a lot of times it's like, I don't want anybody to know, so we want to keep this hush and quiet, which means immediately you're living in a fear that's probably going to not help the situation, because you yourselves, you know, married to an addict or the parent of an addict, whatever, friend of an addict, you are going to be in a position where you're going to need counsel. You're going to need advice. You're going to need to know how to walk through this. Will you agree with that? Because your instincts are probably not going to be what the individual needs.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. And I know things like Al-Anon exist, and you know, other, you know, different care groups like that can be very, very helpful.
Yes.
But also, even in a church like ours, anytime I've encountered somebody, almost with any sin issue, I know there are other people in the church who have that same story. Like, a lot of people could see you and have no idea that alcoholism is part of your story. They just wouldn't know if they didn't know you before and never saw you in that state. Now, when they hear your story, there's going to be, I guarantee you, people are like, I have the same story, or my daughter had the same story, or my son, or whatever, which I think is really encouraging. Going back to that phrase, the gift of desperation, which is probably what we'll title this episode. It's really important that we all, no matter what it is, just as sinners, recognize we're desperate for the redeeming work of God. We need the powerful work of the Spirit to do that work in our lives, which draws us to Him. So we rest in Him, right? God does that in a number of ways in terms of how He calls us to Himself. So talk about that journey. So you are in a mother's heart, you mentioned that, you're in this Bible study. And at what point, and maybe this was early in your life when you said, I profess faith in Christ, but at what point did you really realize, God is my way out of this? You know, this is the only way I'm going to get out of this. And you talked about how you prayed a lot. So talk about that experience and your intimacy with the Lord, how that changed.
Yeah. So looking back at everything, I realized kind of what I was doing my whole life up until this gift of desperation. It's more or less box checking. I was doing what was expected of me. I was doing what I thought I should be doing, but my heart wasn't in it. You know, and I remember, I mean, I would physically be in church. I would be doodling on something, you know. Whereas now, really in the very beginning, because, you know, it was turn your will and your life over to the care of God.
Yeah,
as you
surrender.
understand Him.
Right,
yes, that surrender, step 3, in the 12 steps. There was this kind of like, but I'm a Christian and I go to church and I go to Bible study and I do these things. What else am I supposed to do? You know? And that was when somebody, a sponsor, had let me know it was an inside job. And I just didn't understand that.
Yeah.
Because all I had known was this outward demonstration of faith and not this personal relationship with God.
Was that the language your sponsor actually used? It's an inside job?
I don't think so.
But it's great. That's why I asked. 'Cause I think it's really, really exceptional counsel, because it's easy to give the exterior picture of I've got it all together, I've checked the boxes, I know what to say when asked a question.
Yeah.
But there's a big disconnect between my heart, my head, my actions, what I'm doing.
Yeah, totally. And so I started praying, and I started seeing prayers answered. And
Can you give an example?
I have, I mean, so many, there are so many, and they happen all the time still. In the very beginning, I mean, some of them would just be so little, like they're not really even memorable, but it would catch my attention, you know?
Yeah.
And there started being so many in the beginning that I was like, I want to remember this later. So although I don't remember it in my head, I have a journal.
Yeah, you started writing those down.
I started writing them down because I wanted, I don't know, just if I ever stray again, I want to remember all of this.
Just evidence of God's faithfulness in answering your prayers. And God answers prayer. He says he does. The answer can be yes. It could be no.
Yeah.
It could be wait.
Wait.
But
wait is his favorite.
I think you might be right, which means it's for our own good.
Yeah.
But that we hate waiting. You know, we just hate waiting. But you were beginning to experience that intimacy with the Lord, which was much different than a box being checked.
For sure. Yeah, because previously it was like I'm doing all these things, but I just kind of felt, I don't know, looked over. I was like, did God forget about me? Like, hello, I'm here, I need a lot of help, you know?
Yeah.
And I felt looked over. But when I started, I don't know, when I just started praying, because it was like, well, I don't have a job, kid, husband, or anything else. Like, I don't have anything else to do. I'm just going to pray about everything, you know?
Yeah.
And so just as I started to see these answered prayers, I was like, okay, I think faith begets faith, you know? And so it was like, okay, well, I will pray about this, or, you know, in that I suffered from horrible depression, and especially in that first period when I wasn't seeing my daughter, it was right on Holiday Row. So my sobriety date's October 30th, 2017. And so there, you know, it's Thanksgiving and Christmas and all of that stuff that I missed. So there was a lot of depression, and, you know, I would just pray, like, help me to have a good day. Help me to see the beauty in what feels like an impossible day. Yeah. You know, and some days were better than others. Some days it might just be, please get me out of bed today. You know? Yeah. And so, but I started to feel like God was not only listening, but also answering some prayers, and just like working with me, you know, it was a joint thing. And that is where everything just started for me. And then I started praying all the time. I would pray, I made it like a thing. I was like, okay, every stoplight and every stop sign, I'm gonna pray, you know, because at that point I was doing a lot of driving. Yeah. I was exiled to my mother's house in McKinney. I grew up here. She had moved out there a few years ago, but the AA meeting I wanted to go to was here. And so I was always driving all over the place. And so
every stop sign,
every stoplight, and everything I listened to was either Christian music or a Christian podcast or something, because I was like, I want this flowing through my brain, you know, at all times. Yeah. And so I made use of being in the car that way.
I love the practicality of that. That anybody can do that, right? Just practicing the presence of God. And, you know, I love the honesty that you're giving in this interview and the transparency, because it speaks to so many people who either are in the experience you've had that same experience, or know somebody that is, or could even find themselves there one day. And the hope that we have in Christ and his ability to redeem us, to save us, to rescue us, doesn't always happen in this one miraculous moment of, okay, it's all better now. You talked about the struggle, that depression came in as a result of really a lot of grief, right? And the loss of your daughter. What's going to happen? When will I see her again? You know, I mean, those are horrific things.
Yeah.
Some people listening might actually be doing what you did right now. When you went to AA, you looked at it and said, oh, that's not me. Some people might be listening to this or watching this saying, well, yeah, that was, I mean, she must have been really bad, but that's not going to happen to us. And my caution is that you don't know. You don't know how something could grip you to the point of, you know, there being utter destruction in your life. And I tell people all the time, if there's some part of your life where you know you have a secret you don't want to tell anybody, that should send flares off in your life, because you know, you're going to begin to believe things that aren't true, just as you described.
Yeah.
One of those things, though, that I really want to focus on is how you talked about today. You know, I pray, I forget exactly how you said it, but I pray you will get me through this day. You know, so you knew that there was a 6-month mandate, essentially, that your husband had given you. These things need to change. It could be a year, but that's a long time.
Oh, yeah.
And so you talked about today. You know, I feel heavy today. I feel burdened today. I feel dark today. Talk about the reality of that and just how important living in the moment, day by day. What's the next right thing to do? Those kinds of things. How important is that? Was it for you, but also how important it is for those that you're trying to help now?
Yeah, so important. My mom, she's so wise. She's always right. I hope I'm always right one day, you know. But something she will say is, don't borrow trouble, you know. And really the one day at a time and being in the present moment is, we don't know what that's going to look like. Maybe it'll work itself out, or, you know, maybe it won't even be an issue by the time we get to it. Like, just stay here, you know. Because in those first days, you know, end of October, beginning of November, it was like, well, how do I get it to be, you know, or how can I get to see her then? Or what about da-da-da, you know? And I had to just stay in the day, stay on the task, not focus on these giant things. Just, I mean, really my goal was just to be okay, because at that point, okay was a lot better than what it was, you know? And so I set goals like that were attainable. Like, is this gonna be a great day? Probably not. But can it be an okay day? Yeah, it can. I might even smile. I might even laugh, you know, and just be open to it. And that's what I did every day. Just like, okay, how do we accumulate 6 months to see your daughter one day at a time? You know,
it's going to be 180 days.
Yeah.
One day at a time.
One day at a time.
Not thinking about 180 days, but today.
Yeah, today, making it through today. You know, I wanted to. I'm like an accomplisher, an achiever, and I was like, I need to achieve something every day. You know, and in the beginning, sometimes really, like I said, it might have been getting out of bed. Yeah. You know, it might have been help my mom unload the dishwasher, you know, because sometimes like the depression was so debilitating, like I could not will my body out of bed, you know, and if I did, would I go drink, you know, and so.
So terrifying.
Oh, totally, totally terrifying. You know, but, and so it was like, how can I be of service? To me, that was an accomplishment, you know, if I feed the dogs for my mom. I mean, just very little basic things,
but
they
build on one another, give a hope for the next day.
They do, and they're slowly like self-esteem building, you know, helping others. It doesn't have to be this like massive check that you write or going and building water towers somewhere, you know, it can, I mean, a smile, you know, helping somebody with, I don't know, a house chore, whatever, you know. And so those were things I needed to do to feel like I was worthy of this feat of defying neuroscience and being sober, or my neuroscience and being sober.
So talk about two things I'd like to talk about still. One is when you got to see your daughter, and you got to experience the victory in Christ over that. And then transitioning to what that's led you to do now, what you've studied, what your practice is now. I'd love to talk about those two things.
Yeah.
So tell me about, just what was that like when you got to see her again and begin to see pieces of your life kind of coming back together?
Yeah. It was amazing. That actual moment, I remember the door opened, she was sitting on a beanbag, and she looked like she had seen a ghost, and so it was so happy, but it was like, oh my gosh, she kind of recognizes me, but she just looked at me like, I know that's mommy, but I don't really know what I'm supposed to do,
Yeah.
And so that was hard. But I had to tell myself, this issue exists as a product of my choices. And then I had to tell myself too, I get to see her as a product of my good choices.
Oh, that's great.
And as a product of my teamwork with God. But I knew, okay, this didn't stop. My work didn't stop when I got to see my daughter.
Yeah. It doesn't stop.
No.
Right.
It gets to be a lifelong thing.
Yeah.
And I say gets to be because my life depends on me at least trying to be a good person and do right by others, and so there's that extra motivation, to do the next right thing, to be a good person, to be a good mother, to be a good wife, all of these things. Because I don't know if I would do it if I didn't have this do or die motivation,
Yeah. So it really is that the gift of desperation.
Yeah.
And the fear of what could become the reality again keeps you striving as you abide in Christ towards the right things.
Absolutely. Yes. Do I fail? Yes. Do I try all the time? Yes. It's not perfect, but I try really hard. It's very intentional. Because I think about it, as an alcoholic, but also I just think as a human, our alignment's off.
Yeah.
We're sinners, and if you've had the alignment off on your car, you don't just straighten the wheel once.
Yeah.
You gotta keep it straight. And so I think of it as this daily maintenance. Of connecting with God, serving others, trying to be a good person. But yeah, kind of after that, my ex-husband and I, we co-parented very well, which I think was a huge accomplishment, because there was obviously lots of pain there, lots of guilt, lots of shame, all the spiky feelings, but we were both able to kind of put our egos aside, we tried to do things as I would always refer to it as a modern family, as all three of us, so we would spend, Christmas morning together and then go our separate ways, or we would spend part of our daughter's birthday together, and because we wanted her to see, just because we fell in love or fell out of love or divorced, whatever, doesn't mean we can't still get along, and I don't know, come together for her, you know? So we did that. Then one day, I was over there and he said to me, "I'm so mad at you." And I was like, I haven't done anything. I've been doing the next right thing for 2 years now and whatever. And he said, "This is the woman I wanted to marry." And I mean, I didn't even know what to think. and I was just so confused and everything. And decided, like, okay, maybe we'll date again, you know. And so we did very slowly, and we, you know, kind of made a list. This is what went wrong in the first relationship. Because my part was the most visible part, you know, but it takes two to take a marriage down, you know, or at least I like to think so. But, you know, and made a list, like, this is what went wrong, this is what needs to change, this is what we need to do, you know, and it was about 4 months of that, or meetings, going to a counselor together and hashing all of that out, because I mean, of course I wanted to be back with my ex-husband, like, hello, that's a wonderful story, you know, but I wanted it, like, in action. I don't know. I wanted it to be good, not just sound good.
Yeah, that's good. That's a great, to distinguish between sounding good and being good means a lot of work, right? In other words, you've got to do the action in order for something to change. If you don't, then it's really that, it's back to that exterior. Maybe we're checking the boxes. It's a good story for people to see from the outside, but the inside still hasn't changed. Individually, but then also together. It is a beautiful story. So it's led you now to pursue a career in counseling and helping others. Talk about that journey, and maybe we'll kind of, you know, in there with some of the ways in which you're seeing God use you in that form.
So when we divorced, I was like, okay, I need to reinvent myself. So I went back to school for my second graduate degree. My parents were like, have you figured out what you want to do when you grow up? And so I got a master's in counseling, and I am an LPC, licensed professional counselor. And it's kind of funny, because in the beginning I didn't want to do substance use. You know, I was kind of like, I was between you and God. Like, and there's nothing I can do there. But really what I've noticed is, well, and I didn't want it to pigeonhole myself, right? But what I saw was that substance use is people's solution. And so the question is, what's the problem? You know, and a lot of times it's, I mean, or not a lot of times, it's always a multitude of things, or combination of things, or, you know, and so I've gotten this great experience all from doing this thing that I was like, I don't want to do. But God called me and said, I know that's going to be good for you. And so I got all this great experience, and now, I mean, it's kind of funny. There are people who are like, oh, I trust you because you've been there.
Yeah, sure there are.
You know? And so it's amazing that God has turned this, what was a really ugly, destructive thing into, I mean, such a gift to be able to tell people, like, I have been there or somewhere like there, you know, and I have felt really awful things and had everybody hate me and didn't seem like, you know, in all of this, but I made it on the other side. I'm happy. I'm, you know, at peace, and like, there's hope. You know? So, I mean, really, when I think about it, you know, I'm like, I was on life support, you know? And then now I get to be here, you know? And, I mean, it's amazing. You know, it's such a gift. And, you know, people, I don't know, I just always say the Lord works in mysterious ways. Like, my mom, again, was always right with that. And so is everybody else who says that, you know, very mysterious ways. And so it's nice, you know, we don't always know how God is going to work, you know, for us, through others. And, you know, sometimes there has to be a waiting period to see, you know, but I think I finally figured out what I want to be when I grow up, and I'm doing it.
And it's it's almost said desperately needed, not to put on the word, but it is. It's every time somebody comes to see me with a very substantial problem, whether it's addiction, a broken marriage, it could be sexual addiction, could be a child that, whatever it is, they almost always feel like they're the only ones. Like there's nobody else in our congregation that has that. And I've yet to encounter something where where I could say to them, no, you're right, you're the only one. I always have somebody in mind that I know I could call and say, would you be willing to talk to so-and-so? And once that happens, there is something that takes place when somebody realizes I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And it's not just theory. You are sitting here in a place of victory that God gave you over something that was horrific, that nearly took your life, and cost you so much. Your relationships that were so severed, restored. The way you guys are caring for your daughter, and I just love watching that. It's really beautiful to see. But what you're not saying is cliche. What you're not saying is it's not hard. What you're not saying is the cost of the wake of destruction isn't real. And sometimes I think people feel that. It's like, well, the Christian thing's just a crutch. No, it's not a crutch. It's the essence of true rescue, of something that was ashes being resurrected and formed into an abundant life. And what I mean by abundant life is peace, hope, courage, love, honesty. Really those things that you saw in those people who were part of your team coming along, they're now radiating out, have been and are radiating out of you. And now God's giving you the skills from your own experience, but also in your training to walk alongside other people.
Yeah.
So you were in private practice now?
Well, wait, I want to go back to something that
you
said.
Sure.
You were saying nobody's come to you with, something that you haven't had somebody else, and it, when I was first getting sober, it's so scary, and especially when you're used to drinking, you don't even think about it. And then all of a sudden you have to think about not drinking.
Yeah.
What do I say? What do I tell people? All of that. And I'm totally able to say to anybody, including like my daughter's friends, parents, people my daughter goes to school with. I'm an alcoholic. I've been sober since 2017, and nobody's like, oh,
Because the fear would be, they would be like, oh, well,
totally.
You can't play with her anymore.
Right, yeah. And I've been telling people this for 4.5 years now.
Yeah.
And not one bad reaction. In fact, I would say probably 65 to 70% of people are like, tell me more.
Yeah.
Or they'll be like, oh, my mom's an alcoholic, or oh, my sister, oh, everybody knows somebody, and so it's scariest in our heads, but I really haven't seen that. People, I don't know, like my daughter has friends over to our house. Their parents trust that I'm not, doing whatever in the closet. Like, it has caused zero problems socially.
I think that's so encouraging for people to hear, because especially when you're early on in recovery, that back to the chemistry of the brain and what's happening there, it is for survival. And if you're afraid of what other people are going to think, which is very real for all of us, that becomes exaggerated. And it's more, like you said, it's more real in your head. And to have other people that know that feeling, had that same experience, and then can say, hey, you're going to be encouraged by how people respond. Maybe not everyone, because that isn't guaranteed, but you are. And then God can really use this. He can redeem this in a way that in this moment you don't think is possible, but He can. And that's really what we cling to.
Yeah.
That's what this whole, this whole podcast has been centered on, is this really the idea of desperation, being able to talk about it and let people see that there's hope. And we want to discuss these things in a real way, pointing people to the hope of Christ, His Word, which you've done so beautifully today. You couldn't have done a better job of expressing it through your own experience, but also through the way in which God's now called you to be those various things as a counselor, but also as a mom, who's, seeking to love this little girl. So tell us a little bit about your private practice now. So you're going to be, this fall, you're kind of, it's fall 2020, 22. So 5 years, sobriety this
October
yeah. 30th. Wow.
Yes.
Praise God.
I mean, isn't that crazy?
It is. It is.
So
but really,
nice.
Praise God. Those dates matter, just to
Yeah.
look back and see His faithfulness day after day after day.
Yeah.
So if somebody has seen this or watched this, we'll have in the show notes, your contact information if they'd like to reach out and, visit with you about that. Is that good?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Anything else you would like to say, or anything we didn't cover that you thought we might, that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I don't know if I actually said the ex-husband and I are together.
Yeah.
Happily.
Yeah. I knew that. I see you guys in the balcony to my left. Every once in a while I come through and sit with my wife and I'm in my robe and y'all are like, what are you doing up here?
Yeah,
It's like, oh, somebody else is preaching today.
I know. I thought we were hiding up there until you told me one time, I see y'all up there. I was like, oh no, he sees us.
These glasses are powerful.
But yeah, we were back together and it was so nice, like just randomly, probably a month ago. I had happened to describe our marriage as peaceful. And I was like, I don't know if I've ever heard that before, and I was like, wow, like that is not me.
Yeah.
And sorry, Hubs, but that's not you either. That is God. That is God just working in and around us all the time. And so it's a wonderful story. It's very confusing though when people ask, how long have you been married?
Yeah. Yeah.
That should be easy, but
Well, it's easy. I can say an easy number, right? But when you have something to say, it's amazing to me. People really want to listen.
Yeah.
And they want to listen because they know they need it. They need what you have, and that is Christ. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
For those who have watched or listening, have listened, really, I hope you've been encouraged by what you hear. It's a real story. It's a hard story, but it's a hard story that ends with tremendous hope in a real God who is our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. If you have any questions about any of this, you can look at the show notes for Ryan's contact information. You can also reach out to us at deeplight@pcpc.org. We would love to walk alongside you. Your issue might not be alcohol or another drug in terms of addiction. It could be addiction to something else, or it could be just despair in some other way. We want to hold out to you a real person whose name is Jesus, who is the one who is our Savior. So please don't hesitate. It's our delight. God bless you.
Thank you for listening to the Deep Light podcast from Park Cities Presbyterian Church. We would love for you to be our guest this Sunday morning as we gather together for worship at 8, 9:30, or 11 a.m. We are located in the uptown Dallas area at the corner of Oaklawn Avenue and Wycliffe Avenue. To find out more, please visit pcpc.org.